It was supposed to be a simple afternoon drive. Steven Seagal had finished a quiet training session at a small dojo outside Los Angeles. No cameras, no students, no media. Just him, the mat, and the peace that came from years of discipline. Dressed in loose-fit jeans and a black jacket, hair tied back, he looked nothing like the Hollywood action star the world knew. He preferred it that way. He got into his black SUV and headed toward a charity event downtown. As always, he drove calmly, cruising below the speed limit, enjoying the open road. But just minutes later, a loud police siren pierced the peaceful silence behind him. Whoop, whoop. Steven glanced in the rearview mirror. A police cruiser sped up aggressively, lights flashing like an emergency. Except there was no emergency. Still, Steven pulled over smoothly to the side of the empty suburban road. The officer stepped out fast, almost slamming his door behind him. Young, tense, and clearly irritated, he marched towards Steven's SUV with one hand already resting on the grip of his gun. There was no greeting, no explanation. He shouted through the window, "Driver, hands where I can see them." Steven lifted his hands slowly, remaining calm. "Yes, officer. Is there a problem?" The cop didn't answer. Instead, he yanked the door open. "I said step out of the vehicle. Now." Steven exhaled quietly and stepped out, moving slow and controlled. His presence alone, tall, composed, unshaken, made the officer stiffen, but the cop masked his nervousness with more aggression. "You were swerving back there," the officer snapped. "You intoxicated?" "No, officer," Steven replied calmly. "I was driving straight." The cop stepped closer, eyes scanning Steven like he was prey rather than a citizen. His jaw clenched, fists tightening. Something about Steven's calmness irritated him. "Don't get smart with me. Turn around and put your hands on the hood." Steven didn't argue. He didn't want trouble, but he also knew his rights. "Officer," he said softly, "before you escalate." "Escalate," the cop barked, stepping back. "I'll show you escalate." His hand suddenly slid from his belt and wrapped around the grip of his gun. In one sharp movement, he drew his weapon and aimed it directly at Steven Seagal's chest. The air froze. Birds stopped. Wind stopped. Even the world seemed to stop. The officer had no idea who he was pointing a gun at, but in 5 minutes, he would be the one in handcuffs. For a moment, Steven Seagal didn't move. The barrel of the gun pointed directly at his chest, steady but fueled by panic, not professionalism. Years of training allowed Steven to remain still, but the officer's hands trembled ever so slightly. "Don't you dare move," the cop barked, voice cracking with a blend of adrenaline and insecurity. Steven spoke softly, his tone calm enough to lower the temperature of the entire scene. "Officer, I'm cooperating. There's no need for your firearm." "Shut up," the cop shouted, stepping closer. "Hands higher." "I said higher." Steven raised his hands slowly, not in fear, but in control. He knew one wrong move could turn this into a tragedy, not because he couldn't defend himself, but because he refused to escalate violence. Cars slowed down on the opposite side of the road. A woman inside one vehicle gasped, pulling out her phone. A cyclist stopped on the sidewalk, recording immediately. Within seconds, bystanders realized something was happening, something serious. The cop noticed the cameras and grew even more hostile. "Put that phone down," he shouted at a teenager recording from across the street. The teen didn't budge. "This is my right. You're pointing a gun at an unarmed man." "Mind your business," the cop screamed. The tension thickened. Steven remained motionless. "Officer," Steven said again, voice low and steady, "I haven't resisted. I haven't argued. Please lower your weapon." The cop's jaw tightened. He pressed the gun even closer. "You think you're tough," he snarled. "You think because you're some big guy you can intimidate me?" Steven slowly shook his head. "I'm not trying to intimidate anyone." "Liar," the cop shouted, spittle flying from his lips. He reached forward with his free hand and shoved Steven in the chest, hard. Steven didn't stumble, didn't sway, didn't even blink. And that made the officer even angrier. "You mocking me?" the cop said, voice shaking. "No," Steven answered. "I'm simply standing." "You're not going to stand long if you keep this attitude," the cop snarled, pressing the cold metal of the gun against Steven's sternum. The bystanders collectively gasped. One woman screamed. "He didn't do anything." A man yelled, "That's excessive force. Put the gun down." But the cop ignored everyone, laser-focused on Steven. "What were you doing swerving?" he demanded. "I wasn't swerving," Steven replied. "Yes, you were." Another shove. Another inch of rage. Another drop of sweat rolling down the cop's forehead. Steven's voice remained calm. "If you'd like to check your dash cam, it will show." "I don't need footage to know when someone is lying," the officer screamed. Steven studied him. The nervous fingers, the clenched teeth, the rapid breathing. This was no seasoned officer. This was someone young, insecure, untrained in controlling emotion, and now spiraling out of control. Steven spoke slowly. "Officer, please. Your weapon is not needed. No threat exists here." The cop's eyes widened with fury. "Are you telling me how to do my job?" He stepped back, then shouted into his radio. "Dispatch, I need backup. I have a hostile suspect. Possible threat." Steven closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply. He had seen real threats in his life. He had confronted real danger. This wasn't danger. This was a scared young cop making a terrible mistake. The dispatcher replied through the radio. "Copy, backup en route." The cop pointed at Steven with his free hand. "Turn around. Face the hood of the car." Steven didn't move. "I said turn around," the cop yelled. "Officer," Steven said quietly, "you're escalating a situation that never needed to be violent." "Oh, you think it's violent now?" The cop lunged forward and grabbed Steven's wrist aggressively. Steven didn't fight back. Instead, he said, firmly but peacefully, "You're holding a firearm. Please be mindful of where you aim it." The cop froze. For the first time, he looked unsure. He hadn't expected calmness. He wanted fear, panic, something that justified his aggression. But Steven gave him none of it. The crowd grew larger, voices louder. He didn't resist. "This is harassment. Put the gun down, man," a man recording from the sidewalk muttered. "I swear I've seen this guy somewhere." Another responded, "Bro, he looks like Steven Seagal." "No way. Dude, I think that is Steven Seagal." The murmurs spread like wildfire through the gathering crowd. But the cop didn't hear them. All he saw was a tall, calm man who refused to tremble, and in his mind, that was defiance. He raised his voice again. "I'm going to give you one last chance to comply before I put you on the ground." Steven looked directly at him, eyes steady, voice solid. "I will comply with any lawful command," he said. "But pointing a gun at an unarmed, cooperative man is not lawful. Please lower your weapon." The cop hesitated. People recorded every second, and the internet would soon see every angle. The tension was about to explode, and backup was only 30 seconds away. In those next 30 seconds, the entire situation would flip upside down. The officer had no idea the storm he had just created, and in 5 minutes, he would be staring at his own wrists in handcuffs. The moment the officer entered Steven Seagal's property, the atmosphere shifted. Seagal, who was outside near the training mats in his backyard, immediately sensed something unusual the second he saw a stranger approach with tension in his stance. Even before noticing the firearm, Seagal's decades of martial arts discipline had trained him to detect aggression the way others detect loud noise. His body stilled, his expression tightened, not out of fear, but out of readiness. The officer, later identified as Patrolman Jared Cole, had his gun drawn not out of malice, but out of confusion and the adrenaline of a fast-moving situation he believed was dangerous. Dispatch had relayed a vague report hinting at a violent disturbance at this address. The absence of clear details combined with the neighborhood's quiet reputation created a clash of expectations that left Cole on edge. When he arrived and saw a figure he didn't immediately recognize, because, believe it or not, not everyone registers Seagal instantly in real life. He reacted with instinct rather than verification. As Cole shouted commands, Seagal raised his hand slowly. He did not move quickly, not only to avoid escalating the situation, but also because he understood the psychological state of someone holding a weapon. A sudden reaction, no matter how justified, could have ended catastrophically. His voice remained calm, low, and controlled, the voice of someone who understood pressure more intimately than most. "Officer, I'm unarmed. Put the gun down and we'll talk," he said, maintaining steady eye contact. But Cole, overwhelmed by the possibility that he had stumbled into a high-risk scenario, did not lower his weapon. Instead, he took a few steps closer, his own breath heavy enough to be audible. That was the moment things began to shift, not because Seagal reacted violently, but because his security team emerged from inside the house. Two men stepped outside, hands visible, clearly trained and well-practiced. They positioned themselves in a protective but non-threatening stance, forming a semicircle several yards behind Seagal. Cole's perception shattered. In an instant, he realized he might have just pulled a gun not simply on a private citizen, but on a celebrity host to a controlled martial arts session with professional personnel present. Misinterpretation turned into panic. Seeing the officer's distress, Seagal took the lead. With slow, deliberate movements, he approached within speaking distance, never closer than the officer could tolerate, but close enough that his words couldn't be misunderstood. "Officer, you were given the wrong information. Let's slow down," he said, using the same tone he had used in countless de-escalation demos for law enforcement agencies worldwide. Cole's voice wavered. "Get back. Don't move." His hands shook, a dangerous development when combined with a loaded weapon. Seagal recognized this as the critical point. If Cole fired, even accidentally, the situation would spiral beyond recovery. Seagal gave a subtle hand signal to his security team to stand down even further, ensuring that no one appeared confrontational. His calm presence began to shift the emotional temperature. Slowly, Cole's breathing steadied enough for him to regain partial control, but the gun remained pointed. At this moment, another police unit arrived, this time the sergeant on duty. He walked through the gate just in time to witness Cole, still holding Seagal at gunpoint. What happened next defined the headline that would later explode across social media. The sergeant, aware of the actual call details, immediately realized the colossal mistake. He commanded Cole to lower his weapon. Cole hesitated, shock now mixing with professional humiliation. When he finally lowered his gun, his relief was palpable, but the protocol had already been violated. Because Cole had entered private property without confirming the address, escalated force without proper identification, and failed to follow the department's engagement procedures, the sergeant had no choice. Within minutes, less than 5, according to the report, Cole was disarmed, his hands cuffed behind his back, and he was placed into the second patrol car. His face reflected a mix of disbelief and regret. Seagal, staying remarkably composed, approached the sergeant and simply asked, "Is he okay?" He wasn't angry, he was concerned. That reaction shocked even the officers present. The sergeant apologized repeatedly, explaining the mix-up and assuring Seagal that the department would take full responsibility. Seagal nodded, saying only, "Mistakes happen. Just make sure he gets the support he needs." Cole was taken for evaluation, standard procedure after a high adrenaline incident resulting in procedural violations. Meanwhile, the story of the officer who drew a gun on Steven Seagal and ended up in handcuffs himself was already on its way to becoming a viral headline. How a miscommunication spiraled, and why the officer ended up arrested. Long after the patrol car carrying Officer Cole pulled away from Steven Seagal's residence, the echoes of the incident continued to ripple through the police department. The decision to place Cole in handcuffs was not made lightly, nor was it done for show. It was the direct result of a chain of miscommunications, procedural failures, and emotional misjudgments that built upon one another until the situation snapped. To fully understand why Cole was arrested, one must examine how department protocols interact with high-pressure scenarios, and how one small error can create a domino effect that leads to an unexpected outcome. The catalyst was a single dispatch call that came through the system around mid-afternoon, a possible violent disturbance at a residence located in a quiet, high-profile neighborhood. The caller was vague, and the information lacked confirmation. The address was similar to another property 2 streets away, a detail that went unnoticed due to a clerical oversight during the initial transcription. When Cole, already responding to a previous incident, heard the call, he chose to check the address himself, believing it to be straightforward. But in his haste, and this would later be the critical point, he failed to verify the caller ID or cross-reference additional notes attached to the alert. Cole's approach to the house set the second domino tumbling. Standard protocol requires officers to announce themselves clearly before approaching a suspect or unknown environment. Instead, Cole, acting under the assumption that violence was underway, moved defensively, weapon drawn, bypassing more conventional steps designed to stabilize a situation with information before force. This oversight, combined with heightened adrenaline, amplified the risk significantly. A misinterpretation of the scene is far more likely when a weapon is already in hand. Once Cole confronted Seagal, the sergeant reviewing the body cam footage later explained, the department had no flexibility in the matter. When you approach a civilian or any individual with a drawn weapon, the burden of proof rests heavily on the officer, the sergeant said. In other words, Cole needed to justify every second of that interaction. And standing on someone's property with your gun pointed at the homeowner, who also happens to be an internationally recognized figure, without a verified threat, makes the incident extremely problematic. When the sergeant arrived on the scene and witnessed Cole still in a confrontational stance, even after multiple cues that the situation was safe, he realized Cole was no longer acting with tactical clarity. Cole's hands shook, his breathing was shallow, and his responses were delayed. These signs suggested a stress overload, a condition that can impair judgment to the point of creating unintended danger. Department policy is explicit. If an officer demonstrates impaired control and is holding a live weapon, immediate intervention is required. This intervention can include disarming and restraining the officer, not as a punishment, but as a safety measure for everyone present, including the officer himself. Thus, when the sergeant ordered Cole to lower his weapon and Cole hesitated even momentarily, the situation escalated from miscommunication to a procedural violation. Cole had failed to obey a direct command in a high-risk moment. A refusal, even a delayed one, during an armed confrontation is considered a breakdown in command compliance. From a departmental standpoint, placing Cole in handcuffs was not an accusation of criminal wrongdoing. Rather, it was a controlled step designed to stabilize an emotionally volatile officer and prevent further risk. Officers can and do get restrained when they exhibit signs of panic, tunnel vision, or compromised composure. It is part of an internal safety protocol seldom discussed publicly. Most surprising to all involved was Steven Seagal's response. Instead of reacting with anger or indignation, he actively de-escalated the situation. Seagal had a long history of working in close proximity with law enforcement agencies around the world, training officers in Aikido-based control techniques and conflict management. To him, the incident was not an affront. It was a moment requiring compassion. After speaking briefly with the sergeant, Seagal approached the patrol car where Cole sat, still stunned, hands cuffed behind his back. Though officers discouraged interaction, Seagal simply asked, "Is he going to be all right?" His tone held no resentment, only concern. The sergeant later reported being struck by Seagal's composure. Most people would be furious if a cop came onto their property waving a gun, he said. Seagal handled it like he had seen worse. And he had. Years of on-set mishaps, law enforcement collaborations, and martial arts demonstrations had crafted a version of calm that not many could replicate. Back at the precinct, Cole underwent a mandatory psychological evaluation. This is standard procedure anytime an officer displays signs of acute stress that influence their actions. The evaluators quickly noticed that Cole wasn't reckless. He was overwhelmed. He was a relatively new officer who had never encountered a situation that blurred the boundaries of fear and authority so quickly. Public relations specialists arrived soon after, aware that the incident involved a high-profile figure and could easily become a media storm if mishandled. Ironically, it was Seagal's measured response that dampened the potential fallout. No one got hurt, Seagal later said, and that's what matters. Yet the headline that would dominate social media said otherwise, the kind of sensational, almost cinematic twist that spreads like wildfire. A cop drew his gun on Steven Seagal, but 5 minutes later, he was the one in handcuffs. The public, of course, would soon demand answers, and the department would have no choice but to respond. Inside the precinct, the air felt heavier than usual. The incident report room, normally filled with casual chatter and the occasional laughter, was silent. Every officer in the building had heard the rumors spreading at lightning speed. Cole pulled a gun on Steven Seagal and got cuffed for it. Some thought it was exaggerated. Others thought it had to be a joke. But when Sergeant Miller walked in with the body cam drive in his hand, his tight jaw and grim expression confirmed it. The incident was real, and the department had a problem. The internal affairs team gathered in a small, glass-walled conference room. Cole sat on the opposite side of the table, still shaken, rubbing the red marks on his wrists. His eyes were slightly swollen, the stress of the day etched into every line on his face. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't angry. He simply looked defeated. A senior investigator, Captain Rourke, pressed the button to play the footage. Let's start from the top. The room darkened slightly as the video began to roll. The shaky, rapid breathing from Cole's body cam filled the speakers, followed by his heavy footsteps approaching Seagal's property. When the weapon appeared on screen, drawn prematurely, Rourke paused the footage. This, he said sternly, tapping the monitor, is where protocol was broken. Cole swallowed hard. I know what you thought. Rourke interrupted, not unkindly. But thinking isn't enough when a weapon is in your hand. They resumed. The moment Cole raised his gun towards Seagal made the entire room tense. Even though it was a recording, officers instinctively stiffened. It was a surreal sight. An armed cop trembling in front of a man who stood calm and composed like a statue. Then came the sergeant's arrival. The command. The hesitation. The handcuffs. Rourke paused again. Cole, he said quietly, do you know why you were restrained? Cole nodded slowly. I lost control. That's part of it, Rourke said. But more importantly, you didn't listen. He leaned back in his chair. And that could have cost someone their life, yours included. Cole lowered his gaze. For several minutes, no one spoke. Only the faint hum of the projector filled the silence. Then, something unexpected happened. Sergeant Miller cleared his throat. Before we go further, he said, we need to talk about Seagal. The room looked up. Miller continued, folding his arms. I've worked with celebrities before. Most of them panic the second a gun is near them. Some run. Some scream. Some get aggressive. Seagal, he exhaled, didn't flinch. Cole's head lifted a little. Rourke nodded slowly. He handled it like he'd been trained. He has been trained, Miller said. Aikido, tactical work, law enforcement collaborations. Guy's been in more controlled combat simulations than any of us. Cole blinked. He wasn't scared. He was calm, Miller emphasized. Calm enough to keep you from making a fatal mistake. Rourke paused, letting that settle. Cole, it wasn't Seagal's presence that got you cuffed. It was your reaction. But, and this is important, your reaction came from fear, not malice. Cole looked down again. I shouldn't have been scared. No, Rourke corrected him firmly. You shouldn't have been unprepared. The The room fell quiet. After a long moment, Miller placed a file on the desk, Cole's psychological assessment. It confirmed what everyone suspected: no aggression disorder, no malicious tendencies, just acute stress response. A rookie's panic. A young officer caught in a situation too big, too fast. Rourke sighed and tapped the folder. "This isn't the end of your career," he said, "but it is the beginning of a correction. You'll undergo retraining, mandatory counseling, and supervised field duty." Cole nodded, visibly relieved, but the shame still lingered. "But there's one more thing," Miller added. He reached into his pocket and produced a small card. "This was dropped off for you." Cole frowned and took it. On the front was a simple handwritten message. "I hope you're all right. Steven Seagal." Cole's lips parted in disbelief. The room murmured. "That man had every right to file a complaint," Miller said. Instead, he asked if you were okay. Cole exhaled shakily, emotion catching in his chest. For the first time since the incident, he felt something other than fear or shame. He felt gratitude. Rourke closed the folder. "Your actions created a dangerous situation," he said bluntly. "But your department is standing with you." "And Seagal? He offered you something rare." Cole looked up. "What's that?" "A second chance." Rourke leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Now the question is, what do you do with it?" When the story hit the public, and the officer faced the consequences, by the next morning, the department hoped everything had settled. They expected a quiet day, a simple press note, maybe a short internal statement. No drama, no noise. They were wrong. At 6:12 a.m., a junior officer rushed into the precinct holding his phone like it was a ticking bomb. "Sir, you need to see this." On the screen was a trending headline climbing faster than anyone could track. A cop drew his gun on Steven Seagal, but 5 minutes later, he was in handcuffs. Below it, millions of comments. Thousands of shares per minute. News outlets picking it up worldwide. Reaction videos already emerging from the US, Philippines, Brazil, India, UK, everywhere. Memes spreading like wildfire. TikTok edits, dramatic narrations, even slowed-down cinematic versions of the confrontation. The story had exploded, and the police department suddenly found itself at the center of a global storm. Inside the chief's office, the mood was tense. The chief, a stern man with decades of experience, tossed the tablet onto his desk. "How did this get out?" he demanded. Captain Rourke exhaled. "Body cam footage didn't leak. This came from bystanders. Someone recorded part of the interaction from across the street." The chief rubbed his temples. "Great. So the entire world thinks we arrested one of our own because he pointed a gun at Steven Seagal." "That's pretty much what happened," Sergeant Miller admitted. The chief shot him a look. "That's not helping." But the real shock came moments later when a reporter outside the precinct shouted a question during a live broadcast. "Is it true Steven Seagal defended the officer and refused to press charges?" That one sentence shifted everything. Inside the building, Cole was sitting silently in a private waiting room, staring at the floor. He wasn't allowed to speak to media or non-essential personnel. His phone had been confiscated for his own protection. Every door around him felt heavier than usual. Every minute felt like an hour. He wasn't afraid of losing his badge anymore. He was afraid of becoming a joke, a symbol of failure, a meme, a face people laughed at instead of respected. He heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, and Sergeant Miller stepped in with a slow, careful breath. "Cole," he began, "you need to see this." He held out a phone showing a video clip that had just gone viral, over 12 million views in less than 4 hours. It was Steven Seagal standing in front of reporters outside his home. Calm, tall, measured. He spoke clearly, with the authority of a man who had seen more conflict in films and real life than most officers see in a lifetime. "I want to make something absolutely clear," Seagal said. "The officer who approached me made an error. But he wasn't abusive. He wasn't hateful. He was overwhelmed, and I saw genuine fear in him." The reporters leaned forward. Seagal continued, I've spent my life teaching people how to remain calm under pressure. That officer didn't have that training yet, but he didn't intend harm. And when help arrived, he complied. That matters. A reporter asked, "Do you think he should be fired?" Seagal shook his head. "No, I think he should be retrained. Fear is not a crime. Failing to learn from it is. The boy deserves a chance to become better." Another reporter shouted, "Are you pressing charges?" Seagal's answer was firm. "No, I believe in accountability, not destruction." He made a mistake, but he also stopped when ordered. That means he's teachable. Don't tear down a young man's entire future over a single moment. The clip ended. Cole stared at the blank screen, stunned. "He defended me?" Cole whispered. Miller nodded. "He didn't just defend you. He changed the entire narrative." While half the world mocked the situation, the other half praised Seagal's humility, and surprisingly, many sympathized with Cole. Some of the top comments. Respect to Seagal for defending the officer instead of going Hollywood diva. The cop messed up, but man, imagine the pressure he was under. Glad someone sees his side. This might save his career. Cole felt his throat tighten. For the first time since the incident, he wasn't fighting panic or humiliation. He was fighting the urge to cry. Sergeant Miller placed a hand on his shoulder. "You screwed up. Nobody denies that. But Seagal gave you something you didn't expect." Cole looked at him. "What?" "Grace." Miller exhaled and continued. "The department is placing you on temporary administrative leave. You'll undergo training, evaluation, and supervision, but you're keeping your badge." Cole felt like the air returned to his lungs for the first time in 24 hours. "And one more thing," Miller added with a smirk. "Seagal asked to meet you." Cole froze. "He wants to meet me?" "Yeah." "Said something about teaching you how to control your breathing under pressure." Cole laughed. A shaky, emotional laugh he hadn't felt in years. Outside, cameras flashed. Online, the story continued to climb. And inside the precinct, a young officer who almost lost everything found a second chance waiting for him. 2 days after the incident, Steven Seagal walked into the precinct, not as a celebrity, not as a victim, but as a guest with a purpose. He moved with quiet confidence, the kind that came not from fame, but from decades of understanding human behavior under pressure. Officer Cole waited in a private training room, dressed in plain clothes, nervous but determined. When Seagal entered, Cole stood immediately, hands clasped tightly in front of him. "Sir, I'm so sorry," Cole said quietly. I failed." Seagal raised a hand gently. "Sit," he said. "I didn't come here to hear apologies. I came here to help you move forward." Cole sat, though his posture remained stiff. Seagal pulled a chair in front of him. "You had fear," Seagal said. "That's not weakness. That's a signal. The problem is not fear, it's what you do with it." Cole nodded slowly. "I want to do better." "And you will," Seagal replied, "if you're willing to learn." The training began, not martial arts, not combat, not self-defense. It began with breathing. Seagal stood before him, demonstrating slow, deliberate inhales and exhales. "When the heart races," Seagal said, "the mind collapses. If you control your breath, you control the moment. If you control the moment, you control the outcome." Cole followed his lead. For the first time since the traumatic day, his body loosened, his shoulders relaxed, his pulse steadied. After a few minutes, Seagal spoke again. "You're young. You'll see things that scare you. But you made one mistake that many officers make. You let adrenaline become your commander." Cole swallowed and nodded again. "I should have waited for backup," he admitted. "You should have waited for information," Seagal corrected. "Fear thrives in what you don't know. Strength comes from what you do." They continued for over an hour, talking through mindset, composure, emotional control, situational awareness. Cole listened to every word as if receiving a lifeline. By the end, Cole stood up and extended his hand. "Thank you," he said, "not just for forgiving me, for helping me." Seagal shook his hand firmly. "Good men make mistakes," he said. "Great men grow from them." The public responds, and the story takes a new shape. When news outlets discovered Seagal personally visited the precinct to mentor the officer, the narrative flipped overnight. What began as a scandal became a global conversation about training, compassion, and second chances. Journalists reported, Steven Seagal turns confrontation into a teachable moment. Officers saved from career-ending mistake by Seagal's unexpected kindness. A viral incident becomes a lesson in humility and forgiveness. Comments flooded across platforms. Everyone makes mistakes. Props to Cole for owning it. Seagal might have just saved this officer's future. More stories like this, please. The precinct even received messages from police departments around the world asking for workshops on emotional control and tactical breathing. The very lesson Seagal taught Cole. What could have ended a career instead ignited a conversation that might save dozens more in the future. The viral ending, a message that traveled the world. A week later, the department held a small press conference. Cole stood beside the chief, not punished, not disgraced, but humbled and determined. Seagal stood behind them, a silent figure of support. Cole stepped to the microphone. I made a mistake, he said simply. A serious one. But I was given something rare, a chance to grow. And I intend to use it. Cameras flashed. Reporters typed furiously. Seagal placed a hand on Cole's shoulder and spoke. Don't judge people by the worst moment of their life. Judge them by how they rise after it. Those words became the most replayed quote of the entire week, circulating on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook in millions of loops. And so the headline changed. No longer a story about a cop who drew his gun on a celebrity. It became a story about accountability, humility, and redemption. A cop made a dangerous mistake. Steven Seagal gave him a second chance. Final call to action for your audience. If you believe everyone deserves a second chance, if you believe fear doesn't make someone bad, if you believe humility makes you stronger, not weaker, backhand index pointing right type respect in the comments. Backhand index pointing right like and subscribe for more powerful, inspiring stories.